This happened just last week, during my final days at home, before heading back to college. I've been debating whether or not to even write about it, but the truth is, I can't stop thinking about what might still be happening there. My parents had recently moved. After I graduated high school, they'd been talking about downsizing for years, and once I was set to leave for college, they finally pulled the trigger. Because of the timing, I'd only been to their new house a handful of times. When they first bought it, they gave me the usual tour, pointing out each room, explaining the layout, and warning me about the quirks that come with an older home. One thing they specifically emphasized was that the house didn't have a basement, just a crawl space for utilities, nothing else. They were very definitive about that fact, so I never thought much about it. The night before all this happened, my parents left for a week-long vacation. That meant I had the entire place to myself. It should have felt freeing, but it didn't. The first time I noticed something strange was on a Tuesday night. I was lying in bed, scrolling through my phone, trying to fall asleep, when I heard a faint tapping sound. At first, it was so soft, I thought I imagined it, but it kept going, steady, rhythmic, and oddly deliberate. It was coming from directly below the floor. I sat up, straining to listen. Maybe it was the heating system, or pipes, settling. Old houses do that, right? But the sound didn't stop. In fact, it was so consistent, both in rhythm and volume, that I began to doubt my own explanations. For context, the room I was sleeping in is on the first floor, so anything I heard beneath me was definitely underground. I got up, flicked on the light, and slowly walked around, pressing my ear to the floor in different spots. No matter where I stood, the sound seemed to echo from everywhere at once. That was what made it so disturbing. According to my parents, there wasn't supposed to be anything down there but a crawl space. The idea that I was hearing something, someone, moving beneath the floor when no livable space even existed, was genuinely unsettling. Eventually, after what felt like an eternity, the tapping stopped. The silence was almost worse. I lay back in bed, telling myself it had to be an animal, a pipe, something rational. I managed to fall asleep. The next morning, everything felt normal again. Daylight has a way of making fears seem ridiculous. I brushed it off and convinced myself I'd just been tired, hearing old house sounds, or maybe a raccoon scuttling around, but I was dead wrong. That night, around the exact same time, the tapping returned, only this time, it was louder, heavier, more purposeful. I tried to ignore it, putting on music and shutting my eyes tight, but a crawling sense of dread settled in my stomach. I felt more uncomfortable than I had the first night. By the third night, my unease had grown into genuine fear. The sounds started again, but this time, they had escalated. It wasn't just tapping anymore. It was dragging, scraping, like something, or someone, raking its claws against wood or concrete, shifting around in the darkness, beneath my feet. I remember lying there frozen, the hairs on my arms, standing straight up, my mind racing with every possible explanation. None of them felt right. Dragging something, that's honestly the best way I can describe the sound I was hearing. Not just scraping, or shuffling. Dragging, slow, deliberate, like something heavy was being pulled across the floor beneath me. I kept trying to rationalize it. My logical side was practically shouting at me, insisting there had to be a normal explanation. Pipes, animals, the house settling, but nothing fit. The sounds were far too clear, far too purposeful to be dismissed as old house noises anymore. A thought began to creep in. What if my parents had been wrong about the house? What if there was a basement, or some hidden access point they didn't know about? It sounded ridiculous, but sitting there in the dark, with nothing but dragging and scraping below me, it didn't feel ridiculous at all. The next morning, I told my parents everything. My dad's response was immediate. Check the crawl space. Maybe an animal got in. I didn't want to. Every part of me resisted the idea of sticking my head into that dark, cramped space, but I figured I didn't have much of a choice. The crawl space entrance was under the porch, and just to reach it, I had to get my hands dirty moving aside damp leaves and cobwebs. Holding my breath, I peered inside, expecting dreading to see some wild animal staring back at me, but there was nothing, not even a nest, just cold, empty darkness. I called my dad back, He sounded satisfied with the result, and told me not to worry about it anymore, but I couldn't let it go. I was frustrated, uneasy, and still without answers. So I decided to check the outside of the house myself. Maybe there was another entry point I'd missed. Some crack or vent animals could be squeezing through. I walked the perimeter slowly, scanning for anything out of place. That's when I noticed a pile of old construction materials leaning against the side of the house: weathered lumber, rolled up tarps, a few concrete blocks stacked haphazardly. They'd been there since my parents moved in, left over from some previous renovation, and I'd always just overlooked them. But now, with everything going on, they felt like a possible clue. I started moving the materials aside one by one, half expecting to uncover a small hole or burrow. Instead, what I found was much, much worse. Hidden behind the debris was a storm door, an old metal one that had been completely concealed. It was partially painted over, rusted at the hinges, and looked like it hadn't been used in decades, but it was very real, and it was very much an entrance. My stomach dropped. I hesitated, my fingers trembling on the handle, but some mix of fear and curiosity pushed me to open it. The door creaked violently, sending an echo into the darkness below. Beneath it was a narrow set of concrete steps, leading down into what was unmistakably a basement. I stood there for a long time, frozen. My parents had been wrong. This house did have a basement. I didn't want to go down there. I really didn't, but I did anyway. The moment my foot hit the cold floor at the bottom of the stairs, my heart started hammering. In the dim light from my phone's flashlight, two things became immediately clear. First, someone had been living down there. I could see it in the scattered empty food wrappers, the makeshift bedding in the corner, the faint smell of stale air, and unwashed clothes. Containers were scattered across the floor, and two things became painfully clear in that instant. First, someone had definitely been living down there. The makeshift bedding, the crumpled wrappers, the half-empty bottles. It wasn't the kind of mess you'd expect from someone just passing through. It looked lived in, familiar, like whoever stayed here had been doing so for a long time. Second, and far more disturbing, this wasn't just a homeless squatter. No, the markings carved into the wood told me everything I needed to know. There were scratch marks, lines and tallies etched into the beams, like someone had been counting. On one of the pillars, disturbing images had been gouged deep into the wood, twisted drawings of people and animals, but distorted in ways that made my stomach turn. Faces with hollow eyes, bodies contorted in impossible positions, something between art and nightmare. I don't even want to repeat what some of them looked like. It was wrong, deeply, deeply wrong. I didn't stay down there a second longer than I had to. My skin was crawling as I bolted back up the steps, slammed the storm door shut, and called my parents with shaking hands. They were stunned. My mom's voice cracked as she said they had no idea there was a basement, let alone that someone had been secretly living in it. My dad asked me over and over if I was absolutely sure no one was still down there. I told him yes. I hadn't seen anyone, just their sins. That's when my dad's voice changed. Serious, urgent. He said they'd cut their vacation short and drive home immediately. The moment I hung up, I went out and bought the heaviest duty padlock I could find. I marched straight back to the storm door and locked it tight from the outside. Finally, I thought, that was the end of it. No one was getting back in. But I was wrong. That very night, I woke to violent banging and rattling, coming from outside, not just tapping this time, full-on pounding. It was the storm door. Someone was trying to get back in, and they were furious. The banging was so loud, so unrelenting. I was terrified the door might actually break. My heart pounded in my chest, so hard, I thought it might burst. I was frozen in bed, paralyzed with fear. Then suddenly, silence. The stillness was somehow worse. Forcing myself to move, I crept to the window, barely pulling back the curtain. That's when I saw it, just in time to catch the silhouette of a figure, sprinting across the backyard, disappearing into the dark tree line. I couldn't see their face, couldn't make out their clothes, but the way they ran fast, deliberate, told me one thing. They weren't afraid, they were angry. The rest of the night passed in a blur. I barely slept, clutching my phone like a lifeline, too afraid to shut my eyes. When morning finally came, I called the police. They came, searched the house, the basement, the yard, everywhere, but of course, they found nothing. Nothing except those horrible drawings still carved into the wood. They promised to increase patrols in the area, but it didn't make me feel safer. My parents came home the next day. They tried to reassure me that everything would be fine, that we'd figure out a permanent solution together, but I couldn't shake the feeling that we were all just putting a band-aid over something rotten. I left for college the following morning, just like I had planned, but I couldn't shake the guilt of leaving them alone in that house, especially knowing someone had been living there, someone we still knew nothing about. No name, no face, no reason, just evidence of whatever they were doing down there. It's been a few days now. My parents haven't called with any updates, no strange noises, no signs of anyone coming back, but it doesn't put me at ease, not at all, because I can't stop thinking about those markings, those drawings, and most of all, the way that figure sprinted into the darkness, like they weren't running away from us, but running towards something else, something I don't want to understand. It hadn't seemed like an emergency at the time, so I let it go. Honestly, I kind of forgot about the whole thing by the end of my shift, but on the drive home that evening, my stomach dropped. The same light blue sedan was still there, same spot, same angle, but this time, the driver's side door was wide open. I knew for a fact, it hadn't been like that in the morning. I slowed down, leaning closer to my window as I passed. The car sat lifeless on the shoulder, its door hanging open, like someone had gotten out in a hurry and never come back. But there was still no one around, no figure walking along the road, no tracks in the gravel shoulder, nothing. This time, I didn't shrug it off. As soon as I got a signal, I pulled over and called the non-emergency line. I told the operator exactly what I had seen, gave her the location, and she thanked me, saying someone would check it out. The next morning, on my way back to work, the car was gone, just like that. I figured that was the end of it. But about a week later, while I was eating breakfast, I caught something on the local news that froze me mid-bite. Police were investigating a missing person, a man, and the report mentioned an abandoned vehicle found along a rural stretch of highway just outside of town. It was the same highway, the same spot, the same car. They didn't release the man's name, just said he was from out of town and never made it to his destination. According to authorities, there were no signs of foul play. No witnesses, nothing. I didn't buy it. Maybe it was the way the news anchor read the story, too neat, too casual, but something about it felt off, almost rehearsed. I couldn't shake the thought that I might have been the first, maybe even the only person, who reported that car when it first appeared. It was eerie, and the more I thought about it, the more restless I became. I tried to push it from my mind, but curiosity sank its hooks into me. Out here, not much happens, so when something this strange crosses your path, it gnaws at you. The next morning, I called my brother, Benjamin. He's a firefighter in a nearby town. Around here, word spreads fast between departments, so I figured he might know something the news wasn't saying. When I asked him, he said they'd gotten a memo from the sheriff's office. Same story, a vehicle found abandoned, a missing man. That was it. He didn't know if the police had any suspects or leads, but he thought they'd probably organize a search soon. That's when I surprised both of us. I told him we should help, maybe get a few of the guys from his station to pitch in too. He was skeptical at first, confused about why I cared so much, but eventually he agreed. Truthfully, I don't know why I was so adamant either. I guess I just felt tied to it, like the whole thing had landed on my shoulders the moment I saw that car. Within a couple of days, Benjamin arranged something official with the sheriff's office. Nothing big, just a handful of officers, a few off-duty firefighters, and me. The search would cover a shallow patch of woods and a couple of irrigation ditches near the highway. From a passing car, the area looked ordinary, but once you were on foot, it was easy to see how someone could vanish in there. We split into pairs. Naturally, I went with my brother. For about an hour, it was uneventful. Just long grass, brush, and silence. Then a voice crackled over the radio. One of the pairs had found something. We hurried to their location, weaving through the trees, until it came into view. A maintenance shack, half sunken into the ground and swallowed by overgrowth. From the road, you'd never even know it existed. The door was hanging crooked, the lock snapped off. Inside, the air was damp and stale, the kind of smell you only find in places abandoned for years. But as our eyes adjusted, it was clear the shack hadn't been empty, not recently. Empty water bottles and food wrappers were scattered across the floor, not random, but deliberate, like someone had been staying there. The team spread out, checking corners, pushing aside debris. Then one of the firefighters called out from the back wall. We rushed over. That's it when I saw it. A small, perfectly round hole in one of the wooden boards, just above floor level. The wood around it was splintered sharp, the edges clean. This wasn't rot or weather damage. It was a bullet hole. We searched everywhere, inside the shack, outside the perimeter, through the brush, for any trace of a shell casing, a slug, blood, anything, but there was nothing, just that one hole. And the awful silence that followed when we realized what it might mean. That unexplained hole in the wall gnawed at me. It didn't make sense, not with the complete lack of other evidence. No shell casing, no blood, nothing except that single sharp-edged wound carved into the wood. The officers radioed in the Discovery to dispatch, and even without being told outright, I could hear the change in their tone. This wasn't just a missing person case anymore. It had shifted into something darker, something heavier. The lead officer gathered us all together, and with a clipped voice, announced that they would take it from there. Then looking straight at me, he asked me to leave, since I was the only civilian present. His words carried no malice, but the dismissal stung all the same. Frustrated, and feeling shut out, I had no choice but to comply. I walked away, casting one last glance at that decaying shack before it slipped behind the trees. Later that evening, I called Benjamin. His answers were vague, half-formed, and evasive, in a way I'd never heard from him before. Finally, with a sigh, he admitted that the firefighters had been asked to leave not long after I did. The police had cleared everyone out, and locked the site down completely. The following weeks stretched on, heavy with silence. I waited for updates, anything at all, but Benjamin's contacts in the department claimed they knew nothing. No leaks, no rumors, not even whispers. That in itself was strange. Cases like these always stirred up some talk in a small community, yet the news never followed up beyond the initial missing person report. It was as if the whole incident had been neatly boxed up and buried, never to be mentioned again. Eventually, curiosity, and maybe something deeper, pulled me back. I decided I needed to see the shack again, with my own eyes. I was certain I remembered where it stood. So one day, I drove the lonely stretch of highway, until I found the spot where our search had begun. The air was dry, the sun unforgiving, and the land stretched out in that same familiar stillness. I spent hours combing the area, tracing the irrigation ditches like veins across the landscape. Everything looked exactly as it had that day. The sky, the land, the bends in the road, yet there was no shack, nothing. I tried convincing myself I had made some mistake, that perhaps I was searching in the wrong place, but even then, the shack should have been nearby, hidden in that range of overgrowth. I searched another section, then another, each step kicking up dust and doubt. Still, nothing, no shack, no sign it had ever been there at all. It was stranger than I can even put into words. I remember standing there in that scrubland, utterly alone, the silence pressed in, broken only by the occasional brush of wind moving through the weeds. Peaceful, yes, but unsettling. The only explanation I could muster was that maybe the county had hauled the shack away. It wouldn't have been impossible to do, though it seemed like an extreme response to a case that had been portrayed as routine. That left me with only two options. Either my memory had betrayed me, or the shack had been removed entirely. Neither sat comfortably. Eventually, I left with nothing but a gnawing unease in my gut. Something important had happened in those final days of summer, something I had been briefly allowed to glimpse before the door was slammed shut in my face. Even now, every year when August ends, and that familiar shift creeps into the air, I think about it, the abandoned car, the bullet hole, and that shack that may or may not have ever truly existed. This happened last August, and it completely changed the way I feel about solo camping. When I was a kid, my dad had this end-of-summer tradition. Around mid-August, before school started back up, he'd take me and my brother on a camping trip. Nothing elaborate, just a few days in the wilderness, a final adventure before summer closed its doors. I'm in my late 20s now, with a steady girlfriend and my own routines. Life has moved on in most ways, but that end of summer tradition has clung to me like an old habit I can't let go of. I've tried to keep that old family tradition alive. Sometimes I can talk my dad and brother into joining me, but more often than not, I go alone. My girlfriend absolutely hates camping, says it's just bugs, dirt, and cold nights, so dragging her along would only make us both miserable. Over time, I've grown used to the solitude, maybe even learned to crave it. For this particular trip, I had my sights set on a spot I'd found on Google Maps. It wasn't a registered campsite or anything official, just a random, isolated clearing tucked deep in the wilderness. That was exactly what I wanted. No trails, no traffic, no families with screaming kids, just silence, just me. I downloaded the map beforehand so I could access it without service, something I always make sure to do, and set out. The hike in took close to 2 hours. I'm in decent shape, but with a pack full of gear on my back, I paced myself. Eventually, I found the clearing, and it was perfect, better than I'd imagined. A flat patch of ground, surrounded by towering pines, and an open pocket, where the sky spread wide above me. That first night was everything I wanted it to be. A small fire, freeze-dried pasta that tasted far better than it should have, and a blanket of stars overhead, with nothing but my own thoughts for company. No questions about work, no pressure about when I was finally getting engaged, just silence, just peace. The next morning, I decided to hike out to a nearby river I'd noticed on the map. The plan was simple: catch a fish, cook it, and enjoy something that felt more authentic than tearing open another package of dried food. Besides, it gave me something to do. Out there, you've got nothing but time, and filling the hours matters. I spent most of the day by that river. The water was cold, clear, and moving quick, and to my surprise, I actually managed to catch a decent-sized brook trout. I dropped it into my cooler, feeling pretty proud of myself. My dad would have been. But I miscalculated. By the time I started heading back, the sun was already melting into the horizon. What should have been a calm, golden-lit walk turned into a slow, uneasy trek through the forest, as night swallowed everything around me. Within 20 minutes, the light was gone. Shadows thickened between the trees, and I was forced to rely on my headlamp just to pick out the trail beneath my boots. That's when I saw it, a faint light in the distance. At first, I felt relief. It swayed back and forth, almost rhythmically, like someone carrying a lantern or flashlight. Maybe another camper had wandered out here too. Maybe we could find our way back together. After all, if you're stumbling through the woods at this hour, you've definitely screwed something up, just like I had. But then I realized the light was getting closer. Whoever held it was walking in my direction. Not wanting to alarm them, I called out, a cheerful hello, followed by a casual question about whether they were camping too. I kept my voice light, friendly, completely non-threatening. The light stopped, just stopped dead, mid-sway. For several seconds, it hung there, perfectly still. My skin prickled. Then, without warning, the light went out, snuffed instantly, like it had never existed. The darkness rushed back in, heavier than before. I stood frozen, staring at the black spot where the glow had just been, my pulse quickening in my ears. Then came the sound, violent crashing through the underbrush. Not stumbling, not cautious, running, full speed. The noise tore through the forest off to my left, perpendicular to where I stood. Whoever it was, wasn't coming toward me, but they weren't moving away either. They were cutting across the woods, like a startled animal. The sound faded into the night, leaving only the pounding of my own heart. I can't even put into words how wrong it all felt, everything about it. If I had spooked them, the natural reaction would have been to call something back, to explain, or at the very least, to slowly retreat. But sprinting into the woods, in complete darkness, at full speed, that was madness, dangerous. I tried to reason it out, the entire way back to my campsite. Maybe I had scared them. Maybe they thought I was a threat. Maybe to them, I was the strange man in the woods, and fleeing blindly was the only thing that felt safe. That was the explanation I clung to. But deep down, I couldn't shake the unease that settled in my stomach. The feeling that something was off, wouldn't leave me. This wasn't just the usual creepy woods vibe. I've been camping solo plenty of times, and you develop a sense for what's normal and what isn't. The secluded nature of this place made it almost impossible for there to be another random camper, and most people, when greeted kindly, at least yell something back. This silence, this darkness, it was wrong. I picked up the pace and finally made it back to my campsite. I was so rattled that I didn't even bother cooking the fish I'd caught. I just crawled into my tent, ate a packet of dry food with trembling hands, and tried to read under the weak glow of my flashlight until exhaustion forced me to turn it off. Normally, I'm a heavy sleeper out in the wilderness. Exhaustion always knocks me out cold, but that night, something woke me. No sound, no obvious reason, just a jolt of awareness, like my body was warning me before my brain could catch up. I lay still, listening. The forest sounded normal, crickets, a light breeze stirring the trees, nothing out of place, but the unease didn't fade. Finally, I realized I needed to relieve myself. I unzipped the tent and poked my head out. The moon was bright enough to cast silver light across the clearing. I didn't even need my headlamp. It said when I saw it. 15 feet from my tent stood a figure, motionless, silent, just standing there in the pale moonlight. I couldn't make out any details, no face, no clothes, just the unmistakable silhouette of a person where there absolutely should not have been a person. My brain stalled. My body went rigid. I'd never been in a situation like this before. My mind was a storm of panic, but my limbs refused to move. Whoever they were, they had definitely heard me unzip the tent, and now they knew. I knew. I was probably seconds away from being attacked. That thought snapped something in me. My survival instinct flared, cutting through the haze. I reached for the switchblade I always kept at the tent's entrance. My fingers closed around it as I forced myself to speak. "Who's there?" I shouted, my voice louder than I expected. The figure didn't answer. Instead, it lunged. One moment it was still, the next it was sprinting straight at my tent. Zero hesitation, zero warning, its legs pumping, its mouth opening in a shrill, unnatural scream that didn't even sound human. The noise froze my blood before the impact even came. We collided hard. The force knocked me backward out of the tent. We rolled across the ground, and I realized instantly this was a man. His weight, his breath, his voice. But he wasn't fighting like a man. He was clawing at my face, like an animal, raking his nails across my skin, as if trying to rip it off. Not punching, not grappling, clawing. I thrashed wildly, trying to get the blade between us. My hand found it, and I slashed at his arm. It wasn't a clean strike, but the blade bit into flesh. He let out a high, horrible shriek, jerking back. And then he bolted. He scrambled to his feet and tore into the woods, crashing through the underbrush, still making that awful noise, half scream, half laugh, until it faded into the trees. I sat there shaking, my heart hammering so hard it hurt. My face burned from scratches, blood slicked my skin, but I didn't know if it was mine or his. My hands trembled so badly, I almost dropped the knife again. For a moment I considered grabbing my pack and running for the car, but the thought of navigating miles of dark forest with him out there somewhere felt like an even worse idea, so I did the only thing I could do, crawled back into my tent, knife in hand, and waited. Every twig snap, every gust of wind, every shift of the trees, made me flinch. I sat awake like that for hours, eyes locked on the zipper, waiting for him to return. It was the longest night of my life. Finally, dawn broke. The second there was enough light to see, I packed up my gear with shaking hands, moving as silently and quickly as possible. Then I hiked out at double speed, my knife never leaving my grip until I reached my car. I didn't look back. I just drove. I thought about calling the police, but what would I even say? Some guy attacked me in the woods where I was camping illegally. They'd probably shrug and tell me that's what I get for camping alone in a remote spot. So I didn't. All the way home, my mind kept circling back to how close I'd come to something really bad. If I hadn't had the knife, or if the guy hadn't run off when I cut him, it would have ended differently. But what still keeps me up at night isn't the attack itself, it's the fact that he was even there, He wasn't another camper. He wasn't lost. He found me in the middle of nowhere, in total darkness, and came for me like an animal. And that scream. God, that scream. Definitely human, but twisted into something I can't explain. I haven't been solo camping since, and honestly, I don't think I ever will again.